Have you ever wanted to build a terrarium but have no idea where to start? Well, in this video, I'm going to show you the entire process from Substrate, hardscape and plants to Springtails and even lighting, using beginner-friendly methods that anyone can do at home. To start off, we need to pick the correct container for our terrarium. Which out of the 5 do you think would be the best fit? This container would do great at keeping in moisture due to the tight opening, however we can't get tweezers to the bottom and the opening is a little too small to fit in any hardscape. But this next container has the opposite problem, with a massive opening which is great for fitting in hardscape, but unless you want to have a lid pre-made, it will not contain the humidity required for a closed terrarium. A jar like this would actually work fine, however the smaller you make a terrarium, the more fragile it will be to surviving, and so for beginners I would recommend starting with something slightly larger. This jar here would actually be a great fit for a first terrarium. It's got a tight seal on top and with a large opening to work through, however you would be limited in your plant choice as many terrarium plants would struggle to fit in. So for today's build, we're going to use this 4-litre cookie jar, which is the perfect starting container. Before we move on any further, I want to start prepping the substrate, and one of the key components is going to be sphagnum moss. You can purchase it in dehydrated bricks like this for super cheap, and here's what you do after you unwrap them. Run your tap until the water is lukewarm and then let it fill up a tub with your sphagnum moss inside, up to about 3 inches of water. Your moss is then going to soak this all up and then you can then add more until your brick is fully expanded. Now my moss is done, I'm going to add 1 part into a container to house my substrate. Sphagnum moss is great inside terrarium substrate due to its water retention properties and it's perfect at stopping soil compaction. We're next going to add in 1 part cocoa coir, which acts as the main base of the substrate, providing good aeration and moisture retention without waterlogging. Next we'll need 1/4 part worm castings, which provide nutrients to the plants so that they can grow and also introduces beneficial microbes into the substrate that will help break down organic matter. We'll then add in 1 part akadama, which is found commonly in bonsai soil and benefits terrariums massively, helping with drainage and root growth. Finally, we'll go in with 1/4 part activated charcoal, which helps with purification and keeps the terrarium smelling fresh and clean. We can then start mixing this all up using a trowel. I'm pushing it all the way in so that it cuts through the sphagnum moss at the bottom and brings it up into the substrate. I'll then do the same thing with my hands, tearing apart the moss and mixing it evenly with the coir and other ingredients. We're now left with a substrate that's fluffy and airy while also being nutrient rich and resistant to compaction over time. I'm now going to collect some leca to add into the base of the terrarium to act as a drainage layer. This will allow any extra water to leave the substrate to prevent it from going soggy. I accidentally added in too much here, so I'm taking some out until we have a layer about 1 to 2 inches thick. Leca is porous, so will absorb water and super lightweight, which makes it the best possible medium to use. On top of the drainage, I'm going to add in a layer of window-free mesh, which I'll place under the jar and cut out using a Stanley knife. This will stop substrate from mixing in with the drainage layer, which wouldn't be the end of the world, but would make things messy and can get in the way of planting. Doing this keeps the layers neat and defined, making the whole process far easier. After it's cut, I can simply slot it in place on top of the leca. On the barrier, I'll add some extra activated charcoal, which is completely optional, but will again help with purification. We can now add in some of the substrate that we mixed up earlier. Make sure when adding it into the jar, you add a slight gradient towards the back. To choose where the back of the jar is, make sure you pay attention to if your jar has a joint at the halfway point, as you don't want this blocking your front view. After adding in the substrate, your next step is to add in some rocks and wood before planting to help build up the natural scene, and this is called the hardscape. I'm using these pieces of dragonstone here and I'm arranging them towards the edge of the jar with a large piece on the left and some smaller pieces on the right. This leads a little pathway through the centre that I can fill later on with different plants and sand and maybe some small rocks. I'm also using spiderwood to wrap around the dragonstone to look like roots climbing throughout the scape. I want to position this piece of driftwood onto the dragonstone, however without some help it's not going to stay in place. I'll first put on gloves and then use superglue and tissue to secure the wood onto the rock. When the superglue and tissue mix together, they react and turn rock solid, creating a plant-safe bond that's hard to break and also waterproof. You don't need to worry about extra exposed tissue as we can cover this up later on with some extra substrate and moss. The terrarium is now ready to start adding in some tropical plants. I keep all of mine inside a container under grow lights to keep the humidity and light levels consistent. I'll first take cuttings from this pileia while I'll cut just beyond a set of leaves, leaving me with a length of stem to push and slot into the substrate. Don't be afraid to try plants in a few different positions until you find the spot that you feel like best suits it. You can see me positioning some of the plants with long aquascaping tweezers, but your hands can also work just as well, and sometimes even better if you don't have any on you. I'll then add in this Paulownia repens to the back of the jar, which is one of the easiest terrarium plants to propagate. I'll follow this up with some smaller cuttings which will add some nice scale contrast with the larger leaf plant we've already used. After slotting the cuttings in up to their first set of leaves, I'll slope some sand through the centre of the jar where we left space, which is a great way to fill in the empty substrate. I want to add some moss onto the hardscape, so I'll prep this sticky substrate made from worm castings, coir and bentonite clay which we can attach the moss onto. To get this sheet of moss here, I went to a damp wall in my garden where a bunch of different moss species were growing. If you have no local mosses, try looking online for vendors selling terrarium moss, or grab some aquatic moss which is more readily available and can work well. I'll now add some of that sticky substrate from before back onto the wood and rocks, covering up with moss. This helps the hardscape elements blend into the rest of the tank and make it feel all more alive. I can also cover up the exposed tissue we used earlier to join the wood onto the rock. To increase visibility, I'll also add a little bit more substrate at the back of the jar and some more sand over to complete the path. Now that all the moss is in, climbing plants can go on top, which will add more detail to the mossy areas and will help fill them out over time. They are perfect for jar terrariums and will take a while before they grow too large, in which they can then be propagated and put into new terrariums. We can now spray down the terrarium with water. It's best to avoid tap water as it can leave residue on the jar and leach impurities into the substrate. But if it's all you got, then it most likely won't be a problem. It's best to use deionized water or rainwater, which will benefit the terrarium more over time. You should add water until the substrate is slightly damp but not soggy, and you can always let some water out by taking the lid off for a couple hours. Springtails are a crucial step in terrarium making as they eat any dead plants and add their nutrients back into the soil. They're also especially important in this terrarium as we use driftwood to make the hardscape, which is almost guaranteed to grow some mould. The best way to light a terrarium is with a lamp or some sort of artificial grow light on a timer, which will illuminate the inside of the terrarium and allow you to see inside while also providing consistent light to the plants. Alternatively, a windowsill that's not in direct sunlight will also work great as well. Here's how the terrarium's looking, and I'm super happy with how it's turned out. Thanks for watching, and I hope these tips help you to build your own terrariums.